The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Happy DFS Day, everyone! At least I know how I get to start my Wednesday shows for the foreseeable future. I struggle with trying to figure out how to bring a little energy at the beginning of the podcast, but Wednesdays is taken care of. That's what I'm saying from this point forward. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everybody. I am Dan Besbris. It's DFS Wednesday, which means not that we're exclusively going to focus on DFS. Still going to go through the Tuesday results and make sure we analyze anything that's relevant for season-long leagues. And, of course, we will preview the Wednesday evening card from a fantasy and a gambling perspective. There's a boatload of revenge games coming out tonight. But we have our Beat the Expert contest today, and the expert, Mike Apotria, has once again graciously carved out time in his Wednesday, well, it's afternoon for you, it's morning for me, to walk us through the DFS card and see if maybe he can help us beat him, which is just the most ridiculous thing on earth, but you're still doing it, and we thank you for that. So jumping right in, don't worry, everybody, we'll get to the season-long stuff too. Fear not. At Mike Apotria on Twitter. I am, of course, at Dan Besbris on Twitter. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, Dan. It's afternoon here, definitely, but, I have my Hawaiian Islands morning blend in my cup every morning still. I got that sunrise in there. So even though it's afternoon, I'm still drinking the coffee.
There you go.
Told you, I never put it down. I'm an addict over here.
That was a very good corporate tie-in. I thought that was really nicely done. Of course, Hawaiian Isles, our title sponsor here of all podcasts at Hoop Ball. Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. You can check them out at hawaiianisles.com on Twitter or search for Hawaiian Isles on Amazon. And so, Mike, you're good and wired then today, huh?
I'm ready to go. I've been up since about 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Wait, don't you work
late? Researching, reviewing. Yeah, it's a problem of mine, and I probably should get more sleep than I do. But, I graduated college relatively recently, so I still have that grind in me where I can get by on 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep here and there.
Yeah, not my cup of tea. That's something that even in college I didn't really do that very often. I've always been a man who fully appreciated getting a nice night of rest, and that's, by the way, gone from my life now that I have a 2-year-old. And between a 2-year-old and a wife that works in a hospital, there's an illness in our house all the time. So no one's ever sleeping, and it's just horrible. But I'm alive, and that's fine. So DFS stuff, Mike. Last week, we sort of went through the things that I did right and wrong on my previous card. But last week, the thing I did wrong was pretty obvious. I waited too long to get into the damn contest, and all 50 spots filled up. And so DraftKings was kind enough to give us 100 slots this week. I don't think I'm going to have that same problem. At the time of our recording here, we're about 40 out of 100 full, which is pretty sweet, actually, given, we're getting to 50 at about 1 in the afternoon Pacific time last week. I don't know what the final total is going to be. I would guess somewhere around 70, so I should be able to reserve my spot. But, Mike, how did it go for you last week? I don't even know. I have no idea what the results were because I wasn't in it.
For me, it didn't go too hot for me. A lot of my plays actually hit the nose, and I was stuck on deciding between 1 and 2 lineups. So this is always my biggest challenge with this contest, and I love it for this reason. It really makes me think. I only get to choose one lineup, and I'm a guy who runs out, multiple lineups every single night. So when I'm sitting there trying to decide A or B, which one do I want to throw into the contest, I sometimes find myself picking the wrong one. So right before lineups locked, I wanted to ask followers. I went on our Hoop Ball forums and I posted something. I wanted to ask the readers, and I said, which one would you guys pick if you were me? Of course, I picked the wrong one, so I finished 22nd. And looking at it, the other one I posted, you can go back and check in forums if you dig a little deep. The other one would have had third place, so I would have had back-to-back third place finishes. Instead, I got 22nd. But a lot of my plays hit. I got sunk a little bit by a Justice Winslow play, and that was that game where Utah just smoked Miami. So a lot of their starters, they didn't see any time, but it was a picture-perfect spot that night with Goran Dragic being out. They were missing a lot of their wings, so we were going to see a little bit of Point Winslow. It didn't really pan out for me, but I was happy with the outcome. Like I said, this is my favorite contest to do. I didn't quite get that T-shirt. I didn't get the coffee package, but luckily I ran out multiple lineups, and I did do a bunch of GPPs, and I still managed to do pretty well that night.
All right. So then what I'd like to do on this one is focus on tonight, since I have nothing to base last week off of. Last week, it was really easy for me to get on this pod and be like, all right, here's my lineup, Mike. Tell me all the things I did right and wrong. I don't have that luxury this time around. So we're going to help folks listening, including me, because I'll be listening here, build a lineup for this evening. Where do you start? And obviously your process is going to take longer than the 20 or 30 minutes that we're going to dedicate to it on this show. But where do you start? Do you look at Vegas totals first? Do you look at injury news first? What is the initial move for you, Mike, to sort of get into building your lineup?
I generally start with the Vegas totals, like you said. Vegas totals says a lot about the game, says a lot about the pace, gives you a lot of what you need to know before you're even looking at the players. Kind of helps you, like on these big slates. I had a gentleman on Twitter ask me, how do you decide on your value with all these games? And generally, I don't look at it as I'm looking at all these games. I chalk down a few games, and I turn like a 10 or a 12 game slate into like a 5 or an 8 game slate in my head. So there's a few games that you're immediately looking at with low totals, and you're still going to be paying a premium dollar for those high priced players in those games. So that kind of helps me avoid those guys a little bit more. And eventually I gear myself towards the players I do like. And it's as simple as I go through the DraftKings pool by position. I look at all the matchups. I look at all the prices. I look at who's in and who's out. I go then at that point, I narrow down just by matchup a lot of the guys I like and the spots that they're in. And then I try to see if their prices are worth it to me. I might go back and look at past games, the recent usage rates, recent performances, hot streaks, cold streaks, see what the coaches are saying on them, things like that, to just get a little bit more. And as I'm writing these players down, I write these little notes right next to it. So that way you never want to forget. It's hard when you're going through all these slates and all these games to remember all the value and all the players that you do like. So I highly encourage just writing it down. It's a simple thing that when you're going back through and making a lineup, you already have your own player pool right in front of you. You can almost X out half the players. And I feel like doing that way, you almost need to take a stance on players anyway. You can't 100% everybody. You can't play everybody. So having that stance and having that piece of paper in front of you, which I'm going to give our listeners a nice little cheat sheet preview, something that, a lot of writers and a lot of people normally wouldn't do is I'm going to go over some of the guys on my list. I'm going to talk about a lot of guys on the list, and a lot of the guys I'm probably going to have in this contest are on this list.
So I have a couple of questions. I have a couple questions for you on the totals front before we even get into the list. You mentioned eliminating a few games. So looking at the Vegas totals for this evening, the lowest is Memphis-Portland. That total is at 201.5. Do you basically just wipe out both of those teams because it seems like there are going to be about 10 fewer points in that ballgame than anything else on the card?
So initially, when I even wrote this on my piece of paper, I put on the top of the day, I put December 19th as of 11 a.m. That was Eastern Standard Time. Since then, at that point, actually, that game was completely crossed off. But since then, Vucevic's out. He had the birth of a child. So now we might be looking at Mo Bamba starting.
Oh, that's the Magic game, right? That's San Antonio, Orlando?
Yeah, I thought that's what you said. I'm sorry.
It cut out, I think. Memphis-Portland was actually
Oh, Memphis-Portland. Yeah, actually, I did X that one pretty much off. I'm sorry. I thought you talked about the San Antonio-Orlando game. Memphis-Portland is pretty much X'd off for me. Lillard, Lillard can go off in any spot. I'm never going to say don't play Damian Lillard. He's a bad play. But you have to look at the slate in a perspective. Is he better than the guys that are, $500, $600, $700 cheaper? Is he in a better spot than those guys? And vice versa, go $700, $500, $600 higher. And do you think he's in a better spot than those guys? So it becomes pretty easy to see and look at it and be like, well, there's a few guys I'd rather maybe spend up the extra $2,000 to go to Russell Westbrook against, a Kings team with a high-paced game that we're looking at a game total of, I believe it's like 236.5 right now.
Yeah, it's really high.
You're looking at an extra 36 or 35 points in that game all around. So it becomes a little easier to kind of narrow those guys off. And we know that Memphis is a team that generally slows down the pace, plays slow. We're looking at last game, we saw Conley out. He might be playing today. We don't really have that news yet, I don't think. But it's not a matchup I'm really looking forward to if Conley is in anyway. He's a good defender. So I'm probably leading off that game. I'm not a guy that's always high on CJ McCollum. And for Nurkic, I'm really banking on him having the minutes and a good matchup to even play him.
The second and third lowest games do include the one that you mentioned and one other one. The San Antonio-Orlando is the third lowest total, at least that opening line. Let me see if it's at 210 right now. So it's still the third lowest. It was the second lowest, at opening, and now it is the third lowest because another one jumped past it. Spurs Magic, based on what we know about San Antonio being horrible on the road, the Magic playing some really ugly games recently. You started to talk about Vooch being out. Does that... actually, that segues to my second question, which I was going to make it about Pacers-Raptors because it sounds like Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka are both out for Toronto. You've got those two games, Mike, Pacers-Raptors and Spurs-Magic, which have really low totals on the board, but also really key figures not set to play. So how do you balance... At what point does the value of a replacement player overcome the obscenely low total? For example, and let me see if I'm making my question clear. For the Raptors, with Kyle Lowry out, there's usually a pretty clear, Fred VanVleet bump. If Vooch is out, you mentioned Mo Bamba starting. There's a pretty clear bump there because there just aren't that many other options to take those particular minutes. Are those guys then cheap enough on DraftKings to outweigh the fact that the total is really low? Did that make sense?
Oh, yeah, I completely understood the question. Yes, it does, actually. And that's why when I thought we were talking about the Orlando game, that was a game I completely X'd off at the beginning. And it's really hard to ignore a player despite the matchup, like Mo Bamba starting. Yes, he can get in foul trouble early. He might only play, 26 minutes, but he's a guy that we've seen in 24 minutes put up at least 20, 22 to 25 DraftKings points regularly. So we know he's getting at least that floor. And his price is already below that floor. And on top of, we have the upside. If he sees 30 minutes, gets a double-double and a few blocks, that's a steal at 3,700. In those types of matchups, what I generally try to do, if I know it's a low total, I'm not trying to heavily target that game. So what you're going to do is use that value as one-offs and then still maintain and get a lot of that other exposure to the higher total games. Like tonight, I'm going to have a ton of exposure to the New Orleans-Milwaukee game, the OKC-Sacramento game are going to be two games I'm heavily on. So I'm going to look to get my exposure in the San Antonio and Orlando game through the value. And the same thing through the Toronto and Indiana game. I mean, you're going to have loads of value all over the place there with, I know you mentioned VanVleet, but we also have Ibaka's ruled out. Valanciunas got surgery. Siakam's ruled in, but I mean, we might be seeing Greg Monroe actually play minutes right now. He's already probably looking at starting. So he's only 4,100 at DraftKings, and I hate Greg Monroe, and I never feel comfortable about playing him when he's chalk, but he's going to be extremely hard to ignore at 4,100 if he's seeing 25 to 30 minutes in the starting lineup. He's going to see rebounds. He's a garbage stat kind of guy. So, again, we're not looking for these guys to blow up for a week. It's not necessarily season long. We're looking to hit them on that one night, and a lot of this time when we get these late scratches, these guys' prices aren't adjusted at the beginning of the slate because the pricing already came out. They were taking into account certain players playing. Like, we weren't expecting Vucevic to be ruled out. So at the beginning of the day, when they price him at $9K, you're looking at Mo Bamba being priced at his 3.7. That's a regular price. If Vucevic was ruled out last night, Mo Bamba might be like 4,500 or 5K.
This is where DFS actually has a little bit of a leg up on traditional betting, because in traditional betting, the books become exposed when there's this type of uncertainty. In DFS, the engines that power it, like DraftKings, they sort of don't really care if they have a guy's price misvalued. That's up to you to find that, huh?
That's exactly it. And that's what I love to do. And I love to break down the slate. And like I said, we talked about it a few weeks ago, and value doesn't necessarily mean a guy that's between 3,000 and 4,000 on DraftKings. There could be a guy at value at 6,400 or 8K too. Value is all about their price on that night. Where should they be priced according to where they are priced? And, there's a few guys on my list who are between 6, 7, 8K who I still consider value plays because I think they should be priced up between, 9K or 10K.
Okay. So if you're able to get like a Greg Monroe for super cheap, and if you're able to get like a Freddie VanVleet for pretty darn cheap, and if you're looking at Mo Bamba for pretty darn cheap, you've knocked out 3 of the spots on your DraftKings roster so far, and there are only 8 total, right? So how do you decide? I mean, if those 4 guys cost what, like about 15 to 16,000 all told, because they're all pretty darn cheap, that leaves you a lot of DraftKings dollars to fill out the other 5. Would you then start from the top on DraftKings and work your way down and look at the really expensive guys? Or you mentioned just a moment ago, once you've got your affordable guys in the lineup, you look and you try to find your superstars in the games with really high totals. Is that the method you take? I'm trying to put together in my head, like, okay, I've got these 3 guys lined up. How do I decide on the other 5?
So that's a great question. And I look at what other value I have on the slate, and I determine, value versus value, I guess you could say, and what positions outweigh what positions. So we know right there we have 2 great center plays that are very, very cheap. So right off the rip, you know that you could spend up a little bit on your guard position or your forward position. So then I look at all the other value that we have, and I look at the studs I want to put in there. So, my favorite stud player of the night is the highest priced guy in the night. It's Anthony Davis. No Mirotic, no Randall, going against a Milwaukee team with a weak front court. It's a dream matchup and a dream spot as long as he doesn't have one of his patented trips. So I might look to throw him right in there. So that takes up one of my forward spots. I already used my center spot on either Monroe or Bamba probably. Sometimes you can even use both with utility. And then I'm looking at my list, and I see a lot of the guards I have. I don't see a lot of guard value I like, other than Van Fleet. You mentioned Van Fleet. He is a cheap guy, so I didn't have him listed before. But I'm looking at guys like Chris Dunn, Derrick Rose, Westbrook, De'Aaron Fox, D'Angelo Russell, Eric Bledsoe, Justin and Drew Holiday, a little bit of pricier guys. So if I'm spending up there and I'm spending up at my power forward position, I'm looking at it, and I'm going to need save some dollars at small forward in my other forward position.
Would you
and
ever
I know
wait?
I'm throwing a lot at you, but
no, I'm processing all of it or best I can. Would you ever wait? Obviously, right now we're talking at about 9:45 in the morning here on the Pacific Coast. So there's still like 6 hours and change before lineups lock. Would you ever wait until, like, say, 4 your time, 1 my time out here to build the other 5 pieces? Like, okay, it's pretty early, or it's pretty easy to say we've got this injury news that came out overnight that builds the really cheap parts of my DraftKings lineup. Do you ever wait until later in the day to see what other news breaks, or do you build a lineup in the morning with the easy ones slotted in? And I know it's a weird thing to say these are the easy ones, but like when the value jumps out at you like that, and when there's this obvious backup that's going to see monster minutes, I'm going to call that the easy one, because that's the one that my brain is like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. My fear, and maybe it's just because I have timing issues in my day and my life, is if I built a lineup now while we were talking on this show, and then in 3 hours we found out a couple more key guys got scratched, I'd want to go back and do the whole thing all over again. So how do you balance the timing aspect?
I generally try to build like a little shell lineup is what I call it. Like I said, I always make multiple lineups every night. I don't make multiple lineups throughout the day. What I do is I make one shell lineup right off the rip, right off what I know for now of the guys I like. This would be my lineup almost if I don't hear anything else. And I adjust because I know if this is what I liked throughout the entire night right off the rip, these are plays I'm still going to like. So then if let's say we got the news that Mo Bamba was going to start later on tonight, not so early. Well, I might look at, my center position and look at, I got Greg Monroe in there right now. Who do I value more? I'm looking at Mo Bamba and Greg Monroe now that the Vucevic's out. So that would be an easy swap for me. So you don't want to ever just completely jump off of everything you thought right off the rip, because a lot of that you should have put some research and time into thinking of. So I try to keep my main core the same. I know these guys that I like going in, day in and day out. And once I see them in that dream spot, I want to nail them right away. Like it's without a doubt. So it's really tough, but you don't want to adjust too much. You don't want to panic. You don't want to jump overboard or onboard certain guys. You got to trust what your knowledge is and that your research is right. But you're going to also want to use that to your advantage. And the one thing that you mentioned is, waiting up until you get all the news, but that can also cause some problems because now you have no lineup whatsoever. It might come down to the last minute and you go to hit submit and you didn't get it in time. And now you're left in a hole. So it's always good just to have that shell lineup no matter what. Let's say you forget, circumstances happen where you can't get to your computer or your phone and you can't do any of the edits you want. You still have a lineup for the contest you reserved going in there. And it may not be your dream lineup, but it's something.
Okay. So let's get to your cheat sheet now. You said you had some little tidbits Let's give folks the big reveal on this one. We've talked about some of the cheapos. Did you have something else that you wanted to throw out there into the ether?
Well, I definitely I mentioned a few of the point guards I was targeting, and a lot of the guys I target in DraftKings are multi-position eligibility. So, I mentioned Derrick Rose and Chris Dunn as 2 point guards I'm interested in, but they're also shooting guard eligible as well. So you could play them, you can mix and match, and that's one thing you always want to do is get that shell lineup in, and you can always tinker with it afterwards, because the more you tinker with your lineup, the more you mess with it, the more you go through these player pools, the better you're going to feel at the end of the day. You're going to feel like you've explored every avenue to this lineup, and you're going to feel more comfortable about it. And sometimes exploring every avenue is the best way to get a solid lineup in there. You might not notice, sometimes I put a lineup in and I realize I could have played this guy that was power forward eligible at center and then switched it up a little bit and done it a different way. But I'm generally targeting these high-paced games. I'm really interested in that Bucks game. I'm looking at Anthony Davis is my main stud, but then we know we have a lot of news, and the cheapie that you can look at is a guy like Etuan Moore at 4,600, who we know there's going to be a ton of usage to go around. And in times past that Mirotic's missed games, he's had high volume shot attempts and played plenty of minutes. So he's another little cheap guy I'm looking at. A lot of the guard positions I'm probably looking to spend up on. Van Vliet is probably one of the only cheap guys I would be looking to. Otherwise, I'm targeting guys like I said, Drew Holiday, Eric Bledsoe, Middleton. Russell is a little tough for me. He's always got the upside. I'm never going to take him out of my player pool. Great matchup. And that's on a back-to-back. They tend to play a little bit slower on a back-to-back. So, and he's coming off a huge game. Guys like that draw a lot of ownership coming off a big game. So it might be a good time to hop off, but never going to say not to play him. But I mentioned targeting forward value, and I think we got to go back to Ariza in this spot. It's another good spot to go back to Ariza. DraftKings didn't price accordingly compared to last night's game, where he had a monster 48 DraftKings point night. So he's still only priced at 4,500, and we're also looking at a revenge spot against the Rockets. So he's going to play high minutes. If the game stays close, he's going to play those big minutes no matter what. So that's the one thing I'm worried about. We do have a little bit of a spread on there. So like I said, making multiple lineups, he's going to be a chalkier play. He's not somebody I'm throwing in every single lineup I have, but he's definitely a great play on the slate.
This is where I run into trouble, by the way. I think I'm pretty good at finding the really cheap guys that can give you a decent floor with a little bit of upside. I always struggle with filling out my lineup with the proven dudes. Is the easiest way still to just go on the Vegas total and not overthink it?
It's sometimes overthinking it's going to be an advantage as well, because you also want to think of, Vegas total is taking the game team versus team into perspective, not necessarily defensive DVP, defense versus position. So, if you get a guy like I mentioned, D'Angelo Russell against Chicago, who's one of the worst point guard teams at defending the point guard, it might bump him up a little bit more in that case, even though the total's not as high. It's only at 215. So there's other spots you got to look at where it's just one-on-one matchups, and you could take one-offs where you're not just targeting the game. A few one-offs that you could probably look at tonight is if you're looking at like the Golden State Utah game. It's not necessarily a game that you want to get a ton of pieces from, but these Golden State guys are all priced under 10,000. They're cheap enough where you could play one of them, and any one of them can have a 50, 60 DraftKings point night on any given night. So it's a little tough just to kind of say it like that. I don't know. Did I quite answer the question, or did I get away from it a little bit?
No, we're good. I'm just trying to look for all the little subtleties here. Do you ever look at line movement in terms of if the total is moving up or down? Does that factor into anything at all?
So beat writers know a lot. Vegas, I always say, knows more. If there's something I'm wondering, a guy's questionable or something, I keep an eye on the beat writers and I keep an eye on the Vegas line. So if we see that line jump up or down, it might have some indication on whether somebody's being ruled in, ruled out, questionable, anything like that. So it kind of gives you a little bit of indication on that front, as far as the lines. But I do target the high total games. But on these 10 game slates or these large slates, you're looking at those to get multi-players from. Those are more games that you're looking to stack heavily. Like I said, get 2 or 3 pieces from those games. I remember 2 weeks ago when you were in that contest, everybody was targeting the Hawks Washington matchup, the one that we just saw. And for good reason. A lot of people were out. It was a high total game, 2 fast paces. Those are the types of games that you want to see multiple players playing.
what if I told you that the Suns-Celtics total opened at 217 and is now at almost 223? Would that mean anything? Would we think maybe that means that somebody smart with a briefcase full of cash thinks that's going to be a really high-scoring game and you could find some sneaky value in there? Or am I getting too deep into the weeds now?
So I didn't even notice that. So that's a very good call. And the first thing that jumps to mind for me is perhaps because they ruled Kelly Oubre was going to play off the bench. So that's another guy that is going to get a decent score off the bench. And I think Jaylen Brown got ruled in as well. So that's two guys that are going to be a little bit more of scoring capable. Maybe that shifted the lineup a little bit, but maybe, I don't know. It's something to look into, and it's something to think about, and it's something to always keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I'm going to put that on my list.
The research.
That's going to go on my list, and we can talk about it next week when we look back. Next week is okay. Yeah, it's the day after Christmas. I was going to say I don't think I'm going to bug you on Christmas Day, but I might bug you the day after. I don't know if we're going to have a contest next week. I'll have to talk to DK and Brew about that one to see what's going on. This is something that I'd be curious in because I watch a lot of line movement in my history doing the sports betting side of things, and when a line jumps that much, that usually means there's something weird going on. So what if this one turns out to be like a 240-point night? Then maybe that's a way we can find some interesting cheap players on DraftKings going forward, where it's like, all right, well, these Boston and these Phoenix guys, maybe they don't cost enough. People think it's going to be lower scoring than it is. Maybe you can find something that way. All right. So here's what I'm going to do, I think, from here is I think I'm relatively prepared for tonight's card. Can I send you pieces of my card on Twitter and we can discuss it in the social media sphere after the show?
100%, definitely.
Beautiful.
I'd love to.
Awesome.
One guy I definitely wanted to mention and I wanted to harp on is don't be afraid to play Nemanja again or any of these guys from the Kings. I'm still going to be playing a little bit of them even after that crazy mishap where that cost me some good money. But that was crazy last game where they just decided to yank all the starters immediately. I don't know what that was about. But.
Yeah, they were gassed in that one. They should be a little bit better rested in this one. Interesting game, too, by the way. Oklahoma City has lost to the Kings twice already this year, so there's going to be a little bit of fire on that side as well. The DFS man, the expert that you're trying to beat in our contest today, Mike Apotria at Mike Apotria on Twitter, Apotria. Give him a follow. I will be sending notes his way as I attempt to make my lineup fit, and I will probably screw it up a few times. Mike, my good man, thank you as always. Have a lovely day. I'll talk to you on Twitter.
Anytime, Dan. You take care now.
Well, all right then. Okay, I think I have the foundation here to build myself a lineup tonight. I'm definitely getting in on this one. There's no chance I'm going to miss it. The extra spaces make it so that I don't think it's going to be a problem. And then what I do, so, as we were talking about this, I started to scroll through the names and put in a few of the guys that we were talking about, like Fred VanVleet. He's $4,900. He's a little bit more expensive. Greg Monroe is $4,100. He's maybe a tiny bit more than I would have liked. As all these guys keep getting ruled out, Mo Bamba is $3,700, as Mike was mentioning. So that still leaves $37,300 left for the other 5 slots in my lineup. And I know this is the part where I start to run into issues. And he was talking about New Orleans because they have both Mirotic and Randall out. So that's like 25 shots out. And they're not all going to go to Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday. So he mentioned Etuan Moore. I mean, this is how I do it, and I know this isn't the right way to do it, but I put Moore in there. I'll put Anthony Davis in my lineup. I'm looking for Drew Holiday to throw him into my lineup. If there's a spot for him, yeah, he's the guard spot. And that leaves me $12,500 for 2 forwards, basically. And, this is like, I don't even know what to do from here. And this is where I might even sit around and wait to see if anybody else gets scratched late. And then maybe I can slot someone in and they can take the burden off of me of actually having to try to make the call on this thing. But, honestly, when I look at the forwards, I don't know what to do. I mean, you could do Marcus Morris for Boston because he, I'm sure, still hates Phoenix. Then you got $6,300 for the rest. This is where I run into trouble because once it's not clearly delineated to me who I should be putting in. Like Fred VanVleet, obvious choice here, and I'm sure he's going to crap himself after I talk about it like this, but obvious choice with Kyle Lowry out. He's a guy you just throw in. You're like, all right, cool. He's going to play point guard minutes, and he's going to get a whole bunch of them. But once you get into this other stuff where there aren't a bunch of dudes out that you have to make a call between, I don't know what to do. And so I'm going to keep staring at this thing, and then obviously I'm going to send notes to Mike like, hey, what do you think about this guy as my last dude, or this guy in my last 2 spots out there? There's so many freaking games today that to me actually makes it a tiny bit harder as well. I mean, you could go Pascal Siakam for Toronto if you think he's going to see a whole bunch of stuff. It's like the list goes on and on of guys that could fit in. Rob Covington, he's not your traditional DFS kind of guy. This is where I go wrong. I need to look at guys that are just out there chucking away, and I'm looking at guys that are like, oh, this guy collects awesome amounts of defensive stats, but that doesn't really necessarily seal the deal. So that's what I'm sitting at right now, and I'm sure I'm going to screw it up. Yesterday, as we start to take a look now more at the gambling and the full season stuff, yesterday was a relatively short card by all accounts, just 4 games on Tuesday night. I'm feeling a little bit sad that I didn't pull the trigger on Atlanta. You guys heard me talk about the fact that was a revenge spot for the Hawks, and it was a trap spot for the Wizards. It was in between their game against the Lakers, and tonight the Wizards play Houston. I mean, it had all the makings of a game that Washington's key guys were just going to sort of forget about, and they very much did. They got into foul trouble. Atlanta just outplayed them almost right from the very outset. They were up most of the game. Washington came back to tie it in the third quarter, and then Atlanta just pushed way out in front in the fourth. But you can't stress about that kind of stuff. The only stuff you can stress about in the gambling side is if you do something for no reason. And that happened to me over the weekend, where there were a couple of revenge games. I think it was Saturday, and I just talked myself out of them because I didn't want to have any more cash on the line. And that was foolish. There was no reason for me to get off of a play that I knew was a decent one. Whereas yesterday, with Trevor Ariza in town for Washington, there was a chance that this one could turn sideways. And so I thought, you know what, the line moved from 5 down to 2.5. I felt like the value on Atlanta was a little bit lost. If this turned into a close ball game, I wanted them to be catching 4 or 5. So that way, if Washington scored a late bucket and then you had a foul, there was still a chance that Atlanta could cover. Anyway, they ended up winning outright. It's fine. I know that my capping was good on that game. I just didn't pull the trigger. That's okay. To me, that was actually kind of a positive. From a fantasy standpoint on yesterday's card, not a ton of things to look at. Tyreek Evans did end up playing for Indiana, and his 14 minutes were enough to kind of turn Darren Collison back into a very passive player. Although, outside of the low scoring number for Darren, the other stuff was actually decent. A 3-pointer, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal and a block, only 1 turnover. Not a terrible line, obviously not a good one either. You would have liked to see him get up around 10 points. But still in a spot where playing 29 minutes and with Evans and Corey Joseph apparently on the block, if nothing else, he's still a guy that could end up moving forward, and I'm not bailing on him. I am a little bit concerned about Victor Oladipo, and I know that probably creates a buy low window, but I don't know that I would take it here. He doesn't still look fully healthy to me. Indiana lost this game at home. It was a little bit of a look ahead with Toronto tonight for the Pacers. I think they'll play much better in this one. But Oladipo was not good. They just couldn't shoot yesterday. They shot 39.8%, so 40 will round up against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, that's a terrible defensive team, and Indiana just couldn't get anything to go. But I'm not abandoning any of my full season predictions on these guys. And also, by the way, really nice to see Thad Young still humming along with 13 and 9, 3 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. Missed some free throws, but we can forgive him for that. Over on the Cleveland side, Larry Nance Jr. was spectacular. 15 and 16 with 3 steals, a block, 6 assists, and a 3-pointer. And if you have an opportunity to sell him to somebody, I would say do it. Tristan Thompson is due back in about a week and a half. Kevin Love is due back in about 3 weeks. So, the jaws are going to close in a little bit, and you're going to want to get something for it before you run out of time. Rest of the Cavaliers continue to suck. Just really bad fantasy players all the way across the board. Washington with Trevor Ariza, that was a fun one. He had 19 and 8 with 4 assists, 6 steals, and 4 3-pointers. This was the high water mark, probably for the year for Trevor, but he's obviously pretty pleased to be outside of Phoenix. I think the reality of being in another dumpster fire, and honestly, I would almost rather be the Suns than the Wizards right now, because at least Washington, or at least Phoenix, isn't completely hamstrung by a gross number of giant contracts. But Ariza doesn't care, because the Wizards are actually trying to make the playoffs this season, and he's going to try to help them do that, even if it's to get the 8th seed in the East and then get waxed by Toronto. So he's in a good spot. Otto Porter will eventually come back, and the minutes will dwindle a little bit, and they'll have to figure out exactly who's going to play where. And, apparently Dwight Howard is feeling a little bit better, but he's probably still a month away at the very least. Markieff Morris fouled out in 17 minutes. I think his minute total will be higher in the next ballgame. John Wall had 5 fouls in 26 minutes of this one. Jeff Green had to play 38 minutes. I think that number comes down if Markieff Morris is not in foul trouble. Bradley Beal's going to play big minutes right now. We still don't have a full set of data on Washington by which to evaluate this team going forward. I think Ariza is a very safe play. Bradley Beal, John Wall, those guys are all really safe. I had a lot of people asking me if Thomas Satoransky was going to blow up. He had 5 fouls. He played 21 minutes. I don't think that he's a guaranteed great play, because he has a very low usage rate when he's on the floor with guys like Wall and Beal. And who doesn't, guys? Who doesn't? We've been begging for Otto Porter to get more involved for 2.5 years now, and it's just not to be, because when Wall and Beal are out there, they're going to ball dominate. So Satoransky's best value is going to come if he can play without one of those two guys, and thus we continue to hope for Washington to trade away one of their key pieces. Wasn't really Kelly Oubre. That was the not by design, but this is looking less and less, by the way. It's looking like they're just going to run it back and crap themselves for the next 4 months. So good luck, Washington Wizards. No obvious pickups here. We'll keep an eye on Green. We'll keep an eye on Satoransky. We'll keep an eye on Keefe, because he's been getting dropped in some leagues as well. Porter out for at least a week. So we shall see. For Atlanta, Dwayne Dedmon, he's rumbling along these days. He had the 4 turnovers, which put a little bit of a damper on things. And Alex Len played actually relatively well in his 20 minutes, which that tells you how hard the Wizards were trying. Bazemore's rolling. Collins is rolling. As we said, Dedmon's rolling. Kevin Huerter played a team-high 35 minutes in this game and is worth a look in the short term. I don't know that he holds this value, whatever this is, when Taurean Prince is back. And it's not clear exactly what this value is. He's mostly just launching from downtown. He doesn't rebound or assist very much. It's mostly scoring and threes. So I guess if you're streaming threes, he could potentially find a spot in your lineup. And I said it, I think, 2 days back, I'm just not that stoked about Huerter's fantasy game. Just not that stoked about it. I love the minutes. I love that he's out there for long stretches of a game for a very bad team, because that just means there's opportunity. But it's all just bombing away from downtown and not really getting involved anywhere else. Frankly, I'd probably rather have Jeremy Lin now that he's healthy again. He played 23.5 minutes yesterday, 16, 3, and 4. He's a stat magnet, and if he can get up around 22 to 24 minutes, then you're looking at a potential top 100 guy, and the only thing that didn't happen in this game that might normally occur is a steal or a three-pointer. And those are things that, we know the body of work for Jeremy Lin. We know that he will hit some threes, and he will get a bunch of steals. So yesterday's game was actually more the anomaly than the reality of the thing. If he's playing 24 minutes, he's probably going to get over a steal a game. When he hits that mark, he's been outstanding this year. So don't sleep on it. And I know he's a very tough guy to hold in unlimited games leagues because he's hurt all the time. But when he's actually healthy and you have this base, like, okay, Jeremy Lin's been back for 2 games. It seems like he's ready to go. You run him out there for a couple of games in a row, a few of those are going to be pretty good. I don't know that he's a must-own guy. I don't know that he's even a must-start guy. But when he's healthy, we saw it at the end of November when he was starting to get his legs underneath him. He had a 19, 5, 10, and 3 game. That was a beefer. He's also shooting the ball exceptionally well this year. And I think it's because he's just picking on second string guys, and he's better than those dudes. So keep one eye on Jeremy Lin, folks. He's back in the mix now that he's healthy again. Lakers in Brooklyn. Nets won their 6th in a row. This was a big one for them, obviously. They wanted to take down the King, and they did so. Big games from Bron, Lonzo Ball, and Kyle Kuzma for the Lakers, who desperately need JaVale McGee to come back. They've lost 2 very winnable games because they haven't been able to stop anybody. And a lot of that is having someone to deter the opposition if they get anywhere near the bucket. Big ups to Jared Dudley. He won that game for Brooklyn yesterday. I know his stat line is not going to be the most glorious thing, but he made some incredibly brilliant plays in the fourth quarter. Offensive rebounds, taking it to the rim, faking passes. He won it. He won that game for him. Rondé Ellis-Jefferson was a guy that I begrudgingly said I would keep an eye on, and he put up a very points-leagueian line of 17, 8, and 3, which all sounds great, but 1 steal, no three-pointers, 41% shooting from the field, 7 out of 9 at the free throw line, only 1 turnover, so that was pretty good. He's right on the cusp, and he's probably going to be more heavily owned than he should be because of name value. But he's a guy that right now is teetering right on the brink. I think you could definitely use him in points formats where his bad percentages aren't hurting you. And the lack of three-pointers isn't really going to come into play all that much either. But he's not doing a bunch of steals and blocks. He's not picking up the defensive stats. He's not shooting the ball all that well from the field. His free throw is not really helping you. In fact, it's mostly hurt. Although if he equilibrates, it comes out to about league average. I don't know. I mean, I think that his scoring and rebounding floats him more than it should be, even in his good ball games. Joe Harris had 19 in this one. His numbers will take a little bit of a dip if or when Alan Crabb ever comes back. And for me, I think this team, you're still mostly using D'Angelo Russell, Jared Allen, and Spencer Dinwiddie. And even with those guys, you're just praying for a good shooting night. For the Lakers, I mentioned on the podcast I wasn't chasing shooting guards anymore, and I feel good about that. KCP played 37 minutes, Josh Hart played 34, and neither of them did jack diddly. Rajon Rondo due back soon, Brandon Ingram due back soon, JaVale McGee due back soon. All of that stuff is going to cut into their minutes and turn them back into the pumpkins that they really never stopped being. It didn't change, you'd love to stream a guy playing 35 minutes and you'd expect more from him in that spot, but they just, KCP took 7 shots in almost 38 minutes on the floor. That's not enough. It's not enough. It was all LeBron, Kuzma, and Ball, and offensively the Lakers were actually just fine. They shot 47%, they scored 110 points, but they just didn't stop anybody. They also were just awful at the free throw line, but that's not really anything new. JaVale McGee, hurry back, sweet prince. Denver, still absurdly shorthanded. Beat the Dallas Mavericks 126-118. Nikola Jokic, 32-16-4, 3 steals and a block. I mean, this is he doesn't want to take this many shots, but he's freaking good when he has to. Jamal Murray, 22, 7, and 15 in that game. We mentioned that he was going to be seeing a big usage spike with all those other dudes out. This is like what happened last year, where everybody got injured, and then Jamal Murray went nuts. And so when we at Hoop Ball were like, we're not really all that big fans of Jamal Murray, then we looked silly. And then this year we were like, well, Jamal Murray showed last year that he can probably do it. And up until everybody got hurt for the Nuggets, he wasn't very good. So we flip-flopped the years, but the handicapping was actually right, meaning when Denver is fully healthy, Jamal Murray slides into a role as more of a scorer who is not the greatest field goal percentage guy and doesn't do a ton on the defensive side of the ball. But last year, the volume kind of made up for it, right? And he shot 45%, which was also unexpected. Very good foul shooter. Turnovers a little bit too high this season. He's not that far off from last year. His minutes are actually up. His shots are up. It's just that he's not making as many. And now we have to try to determine if last year was the field goal percent anomaly or if this year is the field goal percent anomaly and which of our two handicaps is actually right. Either way, you're sitting on him right now because he's dominating with people out and you might as well roll with it. In terms of the sort of non Jokic Murray contingent for the Nuggets, I've kind of given up. Not to say that I don't want any of these other guys, but I've basically given up on which dude is going to be reasonable on any given night. Is it going to be Monty Morris? 5 assists, 1 turnover, by the way. His assist-to-turnover ratio went down in that ballgame. Is it going to be Malik Beasley, Trey Lyles, Juancho Hernan-Gomez, Mason Plumlee? All of these guys are sort of fighting for that standard league value, and to me, the closest has been Plumlee, because at least you know you're going to get rebounds and defensive stats, and that's good enough in a lot of formats. Problem is, of course, he's a terrible foul shooter, and so that can draw you down a little bit. He's number 115 over the last week. He's like 150 over the last 2 weeks. Hernan-Gomez is not inside standard league value. Neither is Trey Lyles. Morris is probably your closest lately to standard league value because his turnovers have been so low. But the other stuff, I mean, you're looking at a guy who is doing basically his best Darren Collison impersonation and could disappear at a moment's notice. You know, IT, Will Barton, Gary Harris, they're all due back in the next week or two. And then what? So if you want to try, be my guest. It's just not for me. There's too much uncertainty. There's too much dice rolling on a night-to-night basis. I'd rather just go with Jokic and Murray and kind of call it a day at that point. Well, we've talked about DFS. We've talked about yesterday. I want to remind everybody again what we've got coming up the rest of the week, and then we'll talk about tonight from a sports betting and a fantasy standpoint. And there are 12 games tonight, so we certainly have enough to cover and enough to freak ourselves out about. I hate these giant cards because I see too many games that I want to bet on, and then I try to talk myself out of betting on that many games, and then I end up picking the wrong ones from my list of leans at the beginning of the day. Got to not overthink it as much is the lesson to be learned from that one. So, first of all, check out the in-season premium membership if you haven't already. Today's a good day to remind you that if you don't have a DraftKings account yet and you're thinking about jumping in on one of our DFS contests, do it through the Hoopball portal. Meaning, go to hoop-ball.com, click on the Premium tab, choose Go Premium, and then get it free. It'll take you to a page that explains a Hoopball partnership with DraftKings, where basically, if you click on a link on that page, it'll take you to DraftKings, sign up for a new DK account, and deposit $10 in your DraftKings account, and you get the Hoopball in-season premium membership free. That's right. With a $10 deposit and a new account at DraftKings, provided, again, you do it through the Hoopball portal so they know where you came from, you get the in-season premium membership for free. It's a $20 value right now. It's $30 value at the beginning of the year. And here's the beauty part. With that $10 deposit, I believe you get a free $3 tournament coupon also. So you can play in 4 of our weekly contests. You could go today, next week, the week after that. We'll go right into the middle of January. And if you win, and when I say win, I mean place in the top 10 in any of those contests, right now at least, you're paying $30 to top 10 guys. That's going to fund you for 10 more contests, or you could just pull out your money, take it and walk, and have the in-season premium membership on top of it. So please do, if you're thinking about joining these DraftKings contests, please do it that way. It's great for us, because then DraftKings is like, oh, sweet, Hoopball is sending us new people. And it's great for DraftKings because they get new players. And it's great for the contest because we fill up the room. Everybody's happy. And it could be just as great for you. Either one, even if you lose all 4 times, you still end up with the in-season premium membership. And it costs you $10 instead of $15 or $20. And 2, if you win any of those 4 times, then you're up $25. Ta-da! That's a beautiful thing. Anyway, we're sending the link out on that DraftKings contest. If any of you want to get on our email list, we're sending out a link on Mondays to the DraftKings contest every time we open it. Okay, so let me know about that at Dan Besbris. Send me a note. I want to thank everybody. We got a lot of replies yesterday of people that want to write for Hoopball. We are still taking submissions today. If you'd like to write for Hoopball, if you want to get involved and be a part of our growing staff, tweet at me at Dan Besbris, DanBesbris, at Dan Besbris. If you don't have a Twitter account, as I said yesterday, I don't care. Make one, tweet at me, cancel it. Fine, whatever it takes. Send me a note. We'll get in touch via direct message. I'll let you know how to apply. We are hiring at Hoopball. We're looking for people who can write, obviously, people that are passionate about fantasy sports, and we're hoping to expand the group of us here. Get some more warm bodies in tow. Make a star out of you in the fantasy world. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. I want to remind you guys, it's a lot of work. This is not like, I'll just screw around whenever I want to. There's blurbing. There's learning how to do shift work on the blurbs. There's learning how to follow all of the beat writers, the teams, Vegas stuff. There's understanding all of the pieces involved in the fantasy side. And then on top of that, once you clear the initial hurdles, then there's article writing. So it's a really intense experience. But if you think you can handle it, if you want to make this part of your life, maybe even a career down the line, let us know. At Dan Besbris, send me a note. We're taking submissions. Love to hear from some of you as well. Tonight, we got about 9 minutes here, which I think should be just about enough to go over the 12-game card. Tonight, you have 7 revenge games on the docket, and I'm going to tell you about all of them, and then I'm going to tell you which ones I do and do not like as much. New York. The New York Knicks are on revenge against the Philadelphia 76ers. They lost by 27 to Philly about 3 weeks ago at the end of November. They're catching 12 on the road against the 76ers. Boston beat Phoenix by 7, and this is a smaller one. This was about a month and change ago, but the Suns are playing well, and as we mentioned with Mike, that total is skyrocketing, which makes me think everybody's going to be scoring points, and Boston is laying a boatload, about a dozen, I think, in this ballgame right now against the Phoenix Suns. Washington in Houston. The Rockets are on revenge against the Wizards. This one scares the bejesus out of me. Houston, actually, for all of their recent wins, actually hasn't been playing all that great. It's been mostly James Harden, actually. They haven't been extra special on defense. I mean, Utah missed a lot of opportunities to catch them in that game. Rockets have won 4 in a row, yes, but they haven't really been that decisive, and that's the key. They beat the Jazz by 5, the Grizzlies by 8. They did play well against the Lakers, but they pulled away late in that ball game, and it's largely, as I just said, been James Harden just going bananas. In those 4 wins, Harden has 29, 50, 32, and 47, including 2 triple-doubles, 10 steals, and 15 three-pointers. He's been unstoppable. Can Washington stop him? No. But at least you got Trevor Ariza, who can walk around and say, I have at least a better idea of what this dude is doing. And honestly, I think Harden is getting himself gassed a little bit here. He played 41 minutes in each of the last 2 games against Memphis and Utah. They're pushing their horse right now. That one scares me. Utah is actually on revenge against Golden State, for whatever that's worth. They beat him in the second game of the year, way, way back, and it was actually just a 1-point game, believe it or not. I think Utah actually is a pretty good matchup for Golden State. They defend the rim well, so they can send the other guys out towards the perimeter and leave Rudy Gobert to hang out closer to the bucket and kind of dare Draymond Green to be a bigger factor on offense. We shall see, but I do like that one a little bit. Spurs are on revenge against the Magic, and we just found out Nick Vucevic is out, which basically eliminates the value on that. Spurs are now favored by 3. It was a pick'em, which in that spot, I think you can make an argument both directions. Spurs have been terrible on the road. Terrible on the road. The Magic are coming off of 2 very ugly wins in Mexico and have 3 days off. So that's another one that scares the crap out of me, especially when you look at injured star theory stuff. Vooch being out, you're going to see the other Magic try to kick it up a notch. San Antonio can't hit shots away from their home arena. Not my favorite revenge game. We'll be tracking it, but I don't think I'm playing the Spurs. That's too tough. Oklahoma City is on revenge. They've lost twice to Sacramento. This is a double revenge game, but Sacramento's coming home after getting embarrassed in Minnesota. How hard do they play? I'm guessing very hard. How hard do the Thunder play? I think I would also guess very hard. And finally, Portland is on revenge against Memphis. They actually just played last week. That's the easiest revenge game to remember of the bunch. Portland lost in Memphis on the 12th, exactly 1 week ago today, 92-83. Now they come home. They are laying 7 points, which I know sounds crazy. We don't know the status of Mike Conley yet. That could play a role. This is one of those situations where Conley, he's questionable for tonight, by the way. And a lot of times when teams miss a star, you actually like to back them. With the Grizzlies, Conley is too much of what they do. The team totally falls apart when he's not out on the floor. He's so critical for them. And you saw it last year when, basically this same Grizzlies team didn't have Mike Conley, and so they went like 25-60 basically. And this year they do, and they're 16-14. He's their everything. It's like with Steph Curry, where when he's out, the line moves for the Warriors, and it probably doesn't move enough. Whereas, like, if Klay Thompson was out, the line would move, and you'd be like, yeah, but, they still have Steph. When Steph is out, yes, there's going to be a lot of yeah buts. They have Kevin Durant, they have Draymond Green, they have Klay Thompson still, but he's the straw that stirs their drink. That is, to me, how Conley is for the Grizzlies. And I actually don't think Memphis has been playing all that well lately anyway. So you throw that all together, you give Portland a little revenge angle, kind of part of a tough road trip for Memphis. They've done a decent job of keeping a lot of games close, which does make me a little bit nervous, but I do like Portland as the revenge angle in that one. From a fantasy standpoint, there's 1,000 things to watch tonight. Marvin Williams in Charlotte, can he bounce back? And I think the answer is yes, because they were just gassed in that last one. The Knicks, Emmanuel Mudiay, Kevin Knox, can they make the jump from points league to 9-cat? Orlando with Nick Vucevic out. How does Mo Bamba fare? Does Jonathan Isaac get to do a little bit more? Phoenix with Kelly Oubre in town. How do the minutes change for the Phoenix Suns? Indiana, it's always the same stuff. Toronto with Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka out. Who actually gets to play the minutes? Washington, Trevor Ariza is in the mix. Can they ramp it up against Houston? New Orleans has Nico Mirotic and Julius Randle out. Does anybody emerge as a potential streaming option for the Pelicans? Minnesota, Taj Gibson versus Dario Saric. Brooklyn, we're watching Rondae Hollis-Jefferson. Chicago, does Wendell Carter Jr. stay out of foul trouble? And then how does that impact the minutes of Lauri Markkanen and Bobby Portis? How does Chris Dunn fare in this ballgame against a good Brooklyn backcourt? Sacramento with Marvin Bagley out. Can Nemanja Bjelica keep playing well? Memphis, what about Mike Conley? What about the big men? Jaren Jackson Jr., JaMychal Green, Marc Gasol, Joakim Noah. How do those minutes shake out? And finally, Mo Harkless on the Portland side. We are keeping one eye on him basically forever because he's another of the, and I still haven't decided on a final name for what I'm going to call the either the Thad Young or the Marvin Williams rule, which is if you're an old man that needs 30 minutes to be successful, we're going to watch you, and when you hit that threshold, we're going to add you, because Thad and Marvin define that rule right now, and I just can't decide which one of them I want to name it after. Maybe I'll just name it both. Maybe I'll call it the Thad Marv corollary or something like that. It'll take him like the name of a Big Bang Theory episode or something. Mo Harkless is in that group. Darren Collison is probably in that group also. A lot of the Dan Besbris old man squad. Danny Green is in that group. PJ Tucker actually needs more than 30 minutes, believe it or not. He's in his own. He's like the 34, 35 minute. That's the PJ Tucker lift. You need to get higher. That'll about do it for us today. Woof. That's a big one. Tomorrow's episode, we'll talk to Christian Villery, the host of Hoopball's Sacramento Kings podcast. Get a little deep dive on Sacramento. And then, of course, Friday, live with Aaron Brewski. We did actually move that earlier in the day for a little bit. My morning stuff shifted for about the next 4 weeks on Friday, and so I think we might be able to do that one in the late morning again here on the Pacific Coast. Good news, everyone. Thanks to Mike Apotria, we're going to keep doing our DFS stuff out on Twitter, at Mike Apotria, at Dan Besbris, at Hoopball Tweets, and at Hoopball Fantasy. Mega card today. Follow me, by the way. I'll get some more gambling thoughts out on Twitter as the day goes on as well. Good luck. Let's all try to survive the night. 12 freaking games. Good Lord. Bye-bye.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.